Somebody do the Jan. Okay. All right. We are going to talk about tonight 70 years of the Rebbe's leadership and focus on the start because Saturday, Sunday, we celebrated the start of the Rebbe's, the day that the Rebbe became accepted the leadership of 70 years. 70 is, as mentioned on Shabbos, a very significant date. So today, I'm going to dedicate today's shiur to my dear sister, Shtenasara Paschaya, who got married today. It was this morning our time in New York last night, but it was just a few hours ago that I finished Zooming with them. So, thank you. Her husband Missy, I said, go to have a binyan adayad, an everlasting edifice. Their family to grow healthy, happy, and they can have a and we'll dedicate this shiur tonight to them. So let's talk about what our topic is, the Rebbe's leadership. Now, I want to start off with a short excerpt of the video, and give me a moment while I share my screen. Okay.
In January of 1950, the sixth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, passed away. For a Jewish people desperate for direction barely 4 years after the Holocaust, he left a gaping void. Hasidim around the world implored his son-in-law to lead the movement into the future. An introvert by nature, for a full year, he refused. As the anniversary approached, Hasidim around the world petitioned the Rebbe to serve as the seventh link in the exalted chain.
Der erste Jutzwarte hier am Mittwoch. Ist noch ein Daumen, aber gehört. Das habe ich gewusst. Gesagt, so unsere Stellung da bei der Tier, mit rein.
Okay, let me just explain to you what's going on. So, the previous Rebbe passes away in 1950, just over 4 years after the Holocaust. At the time, the previous Rebbe had come out of communist Russia. He wasn't well, and the Chabad movement had really suffered a massive blow during the Holocaust, as most Jewish organizations. The Chabad community in America was relatively small. The majority of Chabad had either perished in the Holocaust, and most were still back in Russia and had no way of getting out. It was communist Russia. There was no way to get out for those that were still there. So it was a difficult time in that regard. Now, what happened was when the previous Rebbe passes away, they looked for a successor. There was two obvious successors, the Rebbe, by that became the Rebbe, and there was another man by the name of the Rashag. Why were these two people the main contenders or the main people to be the successor? Because they were the two son-in-laws, and understood that that's generally the way it works. It usually would go to a son or a son-in-law. It had only once gone to a son-in-law previously. The other time it went to a son-in-law was the third Chabad Rebbe, who, interestingly enough, his name was also Menachem Mendel, just like our Rebbe, and his wife's name was also Chaim Mushka, just like our Rebbe. And what's also interesting about that is his wife was the daughter of that previous Rebbe, so there was a lot of similarities between them. Now, most of the Hasidim wanted the Rebbe to become Rebbe almost immediately. People saw him as being a person that was just beyond. He was, when he spoke to people and he talked, he had verbrained, he had written things. People had saw this was a man of immense knowledge and such piety and humility. And to almost everybody, he was clear. Now, the other son-in-law was also a special man. He was a good person. He was a very smart man. He knew a lot of Torah, but he wasn't a Rebbe. He wasn't a man who, as we call, Mishichvei v'mayla. People ask me today, who's the Rebbe of Chabad? There's lots of tremendously great, incredible Chabad rabbis. And if you were to think of the most incredible rabbis out there, there's many of them. Hey, Joe, welcome. But none of them are a Rebbe. A Rebbe is Mishichvei v'mayla. He's a head and shoulders above. He lives in a different plane. And what they saw about the two son-in-laws, the one son-in-law was a chassid. He was a great person, but he was not a person beyond. So almost immediately, everybody decided that the Rebbe was known at the time as the Ramash. And even though he was the second son-in-law, everyone wanted him to become the Rebbe. But the Rebbe refused, absolutely refused. He said, no, he wouldn't accept. He said, if people are going to try to pressure him into become Rebbe, he would, not only that, he would actually leave. He said he would leave. He was simply not interested in the position. But he continued to work tirelessly because he believed full-heartedly and he had given over his entire life to the mission of the Rebbe, of his father-in-law. He was very devoted. He had worked hard within the couple of years that he'd been in America to incredibly develop the movement. When the movement arrived, when Chabad arrived in America, just to understand, there was literally a couple hundred people. That's all that was there. It was a tiny, tiny movement. It was like coming to Chabad Dingley, and from Chabad Dingley we go and conquer the world. It was, it was a tiny organization. So there's lots of different stories about how people tried to force the Rebbe to become Rebbe. There was the people would write the Rebbe letter, and in the letters that they would write him, they would call him the Rebbe, and he wouldn't accept them. And he would say, why are you giving letters to me? Go to my father-in-law. My father-in-law is the Rebbe, And to be honest, to a certain degree, he was really preparing us, whether he knew it or not is not something that I know. He was really preparing us for the time that we're living in now, which would be after his passing, when there wouldn't be another Rebbe. And he said things like, over there, why do you need another Rebbe? The previous Rebbe is still our leader. At the time, he wasn't really referring to him as the previous. He said, the Rebbe is still our leader. He's still leading us. He's still guiding us. And it's interesting now when people ask me and other Hasidim, who's the Rebbe? Where's the Rebbe? What's the answer to that? The answer to that is that the Rebbe is still our leader. He's still with us. He's still guiding us. He's still teaching us. How do we know this? Well, the Rebbe himself said about the previous Rebbe many, many times before he accepted the leadership and even after. Now, throughout the year, Hasidim have this concept called Kabbalas Hanasias, accepting the leadership. So throughout there was still Hasidim around the world, and there was small communities around the world of Chabad. Every community around the world throughout that year was sent in letters from Russia, from I think Argentina, from Israel. A lot came from Israel, from England. Wherever there was Hasidim, they sent in letters writing to, at the time he was known as the Ramash, stands for Reb Mendel Schneerson, but they were sending to the Rebbe, we accept you as Rebbe. But he refused to accept it until eventually he accepts it. It came closer to the time of his father. I mentioned this on Shabbos morning, when it came to his father-in-law's first yahrzeit, and it was a big occasion. The Rebbe's first year of his passing, and it was going to be a big commemoration. The Hasidim came and they pushed him harder, and he said, but I have not received any direction from my father-in-law. Now we understand that Rebbes don't have to talk to people that are alive. They have ways of communicating with people that have passed on. And we know that the Rebbe used to go and spend hours at the burial site of his father-in-law, of his predecessor. So a group of Hasidim went and they begged the previous Rebbe that he should tell his son-in-law to accept the leadership. And somehow, immediately after that happened, the Rebbe stopped declining. He didn't make a big fuss. This was just before the anniversary of his passing. a short while before him. You're going to see now in the video, I'm going to go back to the video. I'm going to show you something that had happened.
Trocken Rebbe, der erste Jutswarte, ich bin am Mittwoch. Ist noch ein Daumen, aber gehört, das habe ich schon gesagt, so unser Stehung über den Tier.
Salted chain.
Der erste Jutswarte, ich bin am Mittwoch. Ist noch ein Daumen, aber gehört, das habe ich schon gesagt, so unser Stehung über den Tier. Und mit reingetrocknet Rebbe, dem Savischkasse, sehen. Mit der Haut reingestückt und getroffen, der Rebbe, ist gesessen mit dem Schneides.
Okay, so what it's saying is that the Rebbe was, they had given at Savish Kashrus that all the people around, it was the day before the anniversary of the passing, and they gave it was the day of the anniversary of the passing, it was Yud Shvat, and they all signed, thousands or hundreds of people, whoever was there, signed this document saying, we accept you as our new leader of the Chabad movement.
Ich denke, dass sie wegen zu Kadanowski, dass sie unterwegs zum Rebbe, dem Savish Kashrus, dass sie übernehmen. Der Rebbe hat gewähnt. Er ist auch voneinander gewinnt. Gewinnt. Und ihr gedenkt die Werte, gedenkt ihr darf so nicht. Ihr sogar zu ihr war auch heraushelfen. Mit was noch ich kenne zusammen. Aber ihr sollt auch noch nicht verwasen von mir im Ganzen. Ihr sollt tun und ihr sollt heraushelfen. Das sollt ihr gesagt. Wir sind herausgegangen. Nachher ist herausgekommen in Chadakov. Und dann gesagt mir, wo sie war dort, als 8. Jahr, bei der Nacht, mit einer verbringt, wo Covid und Schwarz. Oh, wir sind gewusst, dass sie sind etwas da, das ist Neues.
Okay.
There was a whole issue about this Verbringen. Earlier, my father meant to print it in a newspaper. This Verbringen, the Rebbe will officially accept the Torah of Rebbe. The Rebbe saw this, ich bin now, wir sollen schnell schreiben Akrosche. So Reb Shmuel und der Rebbe, was soll ich schreiben? Der Rebbe, nicht Rebbe. Was kann ich schreiben? Ist geblieben. But nobody knew what's going to actually happen by this Verbringen. The Rebbe still wasn't officially going to accept.
What's going on there? Hello, could you see me?
No. Something is blocking.
I never realized my camera fell. My apologies. That's fine.
Now I can see you. Could I ask you, when you go to a gravesite, you're not supposed to talk to the dead. So how did that work at the time with the Rebbe?
Hold on a second. What are you saying? You're not supposed to talk to the dead? You're
Yes.
not supposed to talk to the dead.
Maybe I misunderstood.
Okay. I'm not sure exactly what you're talking about. There's a law that you're not allowed to bring the dead back. You're not allowed to cause the dead to come back into this world. That is true.
So when you
How to climb to a verse from them.
Sorry? So
How to climb to a word from
Right,
them.
there's a few concepts that I think that you're probably referring to. There's number one is that you're not allowed to cause the dead to come back. So King Saul, for example, famously King Saul, before he went to war against the Plishtim, the Philistines, he wasn't sure if he should go to war against them, and he goes to a witch. There was one witch which he hadn't killed, and he went to her to ask her to bring back the prophet Samuel. And that was generally against the law, but he said, well, I had to do it because it was a question of life and death, for the life and death of the Jewish people. But we know that we're not allowed to do that, cause people to come back and appear. So that's when people come back, when you cause, so basically there's a way to cause people that have passed on to come back and appear as living people, and that's something that can be done. We're not supposed to do that. We're not allowed to do that. It's also called something called Dorish Alamesim. There's another concept which you're referring to, is that we're not supposed to pray to the dead. Okay, and that's 100% right. We don't pray to the dead. We go to the burial place of a righteous person, and we don't pray to the dead. It's a holy place. We pray to God, and we ask that the tzaddik, the righteous person buried there, will pray on our behalf as well. That is what we're doing. Now, what the Rebbe would do, and I don't know exactly how he did this, but the Rebbe had a special way that he was able to communicate people that are very righteous, we know that they have communication with people that have passed on. In other words, that for some, we know this about the Baal Shem Tov, we know this about the Baba Sali, about Hasidic leaders and non-Hasidic leaders. They have this ability that the world, that they communicate with people that have passed away. They get messages from people in all different ways and offer. Now, exactly how it works, I don't know, but it definitely would not fall into the category of bringing those persons back from the dead, or praying to those people. Okay?
Could I ask you, if you ask somebody to pray on your behalf after they have passed away, you are communicating with them?
Yes, you're allowed to communicate with them. So
We
that's
are allowed.
fine. You're allowed to communicate with them. You can sit in your bedroom tonight and talk to anybody. You can talk to your parents that have passed on. And
Okay.
not only that, it's a possibility that they would even hear you. You just may not hear them back. As a matter of fact, I'm quite sure you won't hear them back. And if you are, then we should probably take you somewhere to get checked out. But you won't hear them back. But you are welcome to talk to them. There's nothing wrong against halakha to talk to people that have passed away. The Rebbe is a person that could actually hear the reply. That's the difference. Okay? I don't want to get distracted with this because it's a topic on its own. So let's leave this topic for later on, because there's a lot I want to talk to you about, and I was hoping to actually enter into some of the discussions that the Rebbe has.
It sounds like at some future shiur, Fritz would like to talk about seances and the permissibility or not in Judaism.
Yes, we can maybe talk about that one shiur. I think I've done that a shiur in the past, but we'll look into it one day. Somebody sends me a reminder one day and says, "Oh, how about we do a shiur?" Maybe we can do it. It might be a little bit easier than doing a shiur on menorah sculptures, but
You got a Ouija board at home?
Sorry?
I'm wondering if Joe's got a Ouija board at home.
I'll look around for one, and
I'll leave the menorah sculptures for Joe, and I'll do the one on all those other things. All right. So that's a topic in and of itself, but I don't want to get distracted by it. So now, as I mentioned before, there was two things that caused the Rebbe to change his mind or to stop pushing against that. Now, you saw in the article, in the video, when the Rebbe would, when they published that day, they gave him this, the day of the passing, they gave him this letter, and he accepted it, and he burst out crying. Every other time they had come to him with a letter, he had adamantly declined. That was the first time, as we know, that he had accepted, that he hadn't argued with it. What did he say? He said, but there's a condition. I will help you, but you will have to work hard. And you'll see in the Maimer as well, he says the same thing in the discourse that he said. So let's look further. What had happened, and you see even when it was a few days earlier when they published the advertisement in the newspaper about the Farbrengen, he said that they had to change it. He said, "Oh, what are you going to change?" Said that, a Rebbe, what are we going to write? So he just left it. But you see that he was, till the last day of, the last few days, he was vehemently against the concept of becoming a Rebbe. Let's finish off this video because it's got a nice little insight into Yud Shvat.
The shul upstairs was packed. And I remember seeing the walls were schwitzing. I was standing in one corner on top of the bima. When the Rebbe came and he saw the situation, and before they had a chance to make it, he stepped on one of the benches and on top of the table and another table, and before you knew, he was there in his place.
That night, with perfect clarity, the Rebbe laid out the mission statement of his leadership.
Da in Amerika ist allemal a Seder, a desche Sache willen hören a Statement. Und der Statement, da darf sein etwas mit a Chidush dover, mit a Ingen, was im Mavel es erreihen. Ich bemehle das, ich weiß nicht, das darf Mavel sein es erreihen, aber immer will hören a Statement, hat der Rebbe gesagt, dass da drei Sachen. Als da Havas ist Hashem, und da Havas Ater, und da Havas Israel. Und unter die alle drei Sachen seien in Kule Chad. Das ist
As the evening progressed, the Rebbe's talks were delivered in a fresh and energetic style. But something was missing. A Rebbe delivers an original discourse. That would be the ultimate sign that despite his humility and refusals, he was truly accepting to serve as Rebbe.
I remember I've named when this Mendel Schwer was the older Chassid. He said, then tot me Rebbe for Nossi. Sicher we get genug, we will have Chassidim von La Maime.
Wenn Stil, der Rebbe hat genommen den Mai genannt und hat so getan, die erste Werte gedeckt, er gesagt, geschrieben, der Rebbe in der Maimer, was er herausgegeben zu der Jahrzeit von Jud 2.
And then with a broken voice, also Legani Yachishikalo with the enigmas. So everybody stood up, you know.
Okay, so what had occurred over there was that there's historically there was lots. Anybody can give a talk, anybody can say a discourse. What they wanted is that there's some type of style of Hasidic teaching that is unique to a Rebbe, that if a Rebbe does this, if a person does this, and he's been accepted by the Hasidim, then you know that they're formally accepted. And that's to say a Hasidic mimer, which is a discourse which has a lot of new and novel ideas within the Hasidic teaching. It's not really just a discussion, it's much deeper than that. And when the Rebbe started, so suddenly when he did that, it was like, wow, it was a wow moment that the Rebbe has accepted the leadership, finally. You know, that was like almost unofficially, but officially, then it became official. I want to show you, drop more of this video. This is a recording from the original event 70 years ago.
Dr. Avdruf met de Shraba van Noord als legan in Ksifkan. Nou, dan steht legani lignuni. Das ist lemokim shoya yikre batchilo. Warum iker schino ist betachtein Haus.
Und er hat gesagt, das Stück sein von Rayat, nachher hat er gesagt, sein Bier von Enzke, das Haus. Ja, der Rebbe schon gesagt, der Mai Mercedes hat mich schon gewusst, Baruch Hashem, Amot HaRebbe nicht.
I remember Amentlik bending down to the Rebbe and saying to the Rebbe that to us it's no different whatsoever from the Alter Rebbe with the Rebbe. But it was this kind of a matzav at that moment.
Das, was man sagt bei jeder von uns, was mir alle seine Sachen in der Haschwi, von dem alten Reben, was Kol Haschwi in Chivivim, Choscha vielem hat das nicht verdient und hat das nicht ausgehorvet. Nur wenn dann die ganze Chivivim ist, war das der Haschwi.
Модно Wörter geworden. Er hat gesagt, Monten bei jeder einem, man soll wissen am Gefindlichen der Schwing. Jetzt wird man gesagt, wenn man von den Kirchen Lamate in der Tafki, jemals hat man, wenn ich habe gesagt, kann man, ich habe keine Wasser gesagt. Aber später, weil er gesagt hat, dass wenn nicht stamm am Meimer, dass er Antrag, als er nahe Tkuf. Das ist der nahe Tkuf. Und das, was sie gewählt, punktiert bei der Arbeit. Abraham bin und Mesbun, all Ding, wenn er kann, für den Schwie, was hat mehr der Lamate Bord. Das ist ein Nahe.
Doch mit legt sich in Fegelig im Busim und in Mentig legt auf mir a Ribe, seid ihr alle frei und könnt sich tun, was ihr wollt. Machen a good time mit a ruhigen Leben. Das kann keine Union mit Mischane sein. Das darf ihr allein abhängig sein, dem Stuss de Luyumase und dem Koch von Nefesh Abami, so machen der Fuß Stuss die Dusche.
The Rebbe had a certain vision, and that's the way exactly he went for 40-some years. That the Rebbe was not here to be just your Rebbe that's going to do everything for you. You have to do it. But you can count on me to be of help, of great help to you. But I expect you to do it.
Okay, so I wanted you to see this because it's a really important thing for understanding the Rebbe and understanding how we as Chabad people look at what changed or transformed on Yud Shvat on this day when the Rebbe became Rebbe. He's as Rabbi Khan, that man that said that the man that spoke towards the second last person, Rabbi Khan. He's thank God well. He should be well and for many years. He's the chief, what we call him the chief choser. He's the person that would study all the discourses of the Rebbe. He would repeat them straight after the Rebbe would speak for 4 or 5 hours straight, and he would repeat them afterwards. And there was a few people, but he was in charge of that group for most of the time. And he said something really powerful. He said, we saw it as being a new era. There was the Chabad movement, and then he realized, oh, things are going to change drastically. We're now the 7th generation. What he showed is something incredible. And that is, he said, this concept of the 7th generation was mentioned in the previous Rebbe's Maimer. The same Maimer, he wasn't saying anything new. The previous Rebbe had said in his Maimer, the Yerbi that he gave out the year before, that Moshe was the 7th, and it says about him that he was the 7th. The 7th is special. And he chooses something special. And therefore, the Rebbe was saying that obviously the previous Rebbe had said that, implying that the next generation, he was the 6th Rebbe, the next generation after him was going to be something special. They were going to be the 7th. And if you look in history, the 7th being special, he says, and the Rebbe goes on to say, it's not because we chose to be the 7th. It's simply because we are. And if God made it that you're the 7th, that means that you have a special task. What's the special task? He said, look at what the story was with Moses. The Midrash tells us that there were 7 righteous people that started to bring the God's presence back into the world. What had happened is, and he talks about this at the beginning of the discourse, that from the sin of the tree of knowledge, of Adam eating from the tree of knowledge, the Shekhinah, God's presence, left this world and was distant, was not felt in the world. And then as time went on, there was different sins that happened, and each one caused the presence of the way that God is felt in the world to become further and further removed until the 7th level. And so then came Abraham, and he started doing the opposite. He started bringing it back. But you can reach the 7th and the 6th, the realm, and this, but you still haven't reached this world. In other words, you're still not feeling godliness strongly and apparently in this world. When does it happen? Only when you have the 7th, because the 7th actually makes it come back into the world. So the most important is, why was the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge such an extreme sin? Why was it so powerful that it made such a difference? Because it caused God's presence to leave this world. All the other sins afterwards, they had impacts, but the impacts was far less felt. It was less obvious. Why was Moses so important? Because he caused it to come from the first realm down into our world. And that's what made the major impact. He did that by giving us the Torah, God bringing down his will and testament. So therefore, the Rebbe says, the previous Rebbe was saying that the generation after him, the Rebbe that succeeds him, is going to be the seventh, and therefore he's going to be the one that will ultimately achieve what the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, had wanted to achieve. And if you look within the studies of the Chabad movement, you'll see they try to do one thing. The Alter Rebbe said that the purpose of this world is to cause God to dwell in this world. Why? Because it says in Medrash, it says, you can see this in the Tanya, which is authored, he says, the whole purpose of creation is to create a dwelling place for God in this world. And the Alter Rebbe makes that his whole purpose and his whole ultimate reason for existence and what he's trying to achieve, that God present should be felt in this world. And therefore, if that was the purpose, the seventh generation was the one that was going to, each generation brought it down to a different level, but the seventh was going to be the one that was ultimately going to make it happen. In other words, if you look at the Rebbe's first discourse, what you'll see more than any other previous, probably any other previous Jewish scholar or previous Rebbe for sure, that he says that our job is literally to make the godliness felt in the world, and that's going to be felt when Mashiach comes. And his raison d'etre, his ultimate purpose of the world, is the coming of Mashiach, because that's what the Alter Rebbe, and that's what Judaism as a whole, but the one that really started teaching this and making it as their raison d'etre is the Alter Rebbe. The one that ultimately was going to achieve this was the Rebbe. That's what he felt. Now, did he achieve it? And that's why there is no continuation, because it stops at the seventh. It starts by the first, but it stops at the seventh to a certain degree. It starts a new cycle after a seventh. There's a different cycle. It's a different era. As the seventh generation, to a certain extent, we can say that is now over, because a generation lasts a maximum of 70 years. That's this year. We've reached that 70 years. So let's have a look at the actual discourse that the Rebbe said.
Can I ask a question just before the video plays? On the previous video, the nigun they were singing when it delivered the Maimah, the nigun sounded very much like the tune of Avinu Malkeinu Yom Kippur. Is that coincidence?
I didn't pay attention to that. Sorry. There's another song that I noticed that they were singing, which was the song of the previous Rebbe known as the Beinani Nigun. That's what I understood it to be.
Yeah.
Kind of sounds like
it. Yeah. Okay. Can I just say?
Yeah.
Just quickly, if I can. Shavi'i, which in English is seventh. Shavi'i in Gematria is 392. And also, David Meshichecha is the same Gematria, is 392 as seventh, as Shvi. For what it's worth.
And then again, 1 second, I missed the first part. Shvi is what?
Okay. Shvi is 392, and David Meshichecha is also 392.
Oh, beautiful. Very nice.
Okay.
Nice, beautiful. I like that. Okay, so I found this copy of a beautifully translated copy of the Maimah. We're not going to be able to go through all of this, but I want to go through a few points. We're going to jump and start a little bit. Jump around a little bit. Can you see where we are? Okay, let's look at this thing. What is the Rebbe's thing? I want to just point to the first thing. He starts off by revising the discourse that the previous Rebbe had. And in that revision over there, he says, I came to my chamber, my sister, my bride. So this is the day of his, so he says that if you look at this, this is a very interesting thing. Basically, what he's basically saying in this first part is that it's saying that the place where God resided at the beginning of creation, the main place where God's presence was felt was down here in this world. Now, what that's telling us is this, and he goes on to say that therefore our job is to bring that back. Our job is to make God's presence happen. Now he explains that it was here, and what ended up happening is that God's presence left this world because of the sin. So he goes on over here to explain what it means God's presence. What does it mean the Shekhinah? You know, some people like to call Shekhinah means God's female counterpart. No, Shekhinah means revelation, God's presence being felt. So we said that the Shekhinah resided in the temple. What does that mean? That in the temple you could feel the Shekhinah, God's presence. That's what it means. Okay. So he says, why? He says that the truth is the concept of Shekhinah is each place based on its own concept, in its own context. It could have different meanings in different places. There's different worlds, and the way God's felt in different areas has different implications. Okay, I'm going to go jump a little bit further, because what he does over here is he quotes each one of the previous predecessors, each of his previous, to explain this concept. And at each explain, he brings a different point from each of them, building up a beautiful idea. But let's okay, so I'm going to start from here. So he says like this. So, even though before the sin, true that before the sin of the tree of knowledge, godliness was revealed in this world. So that what is that? Therefore he says, nevertheless, the godly light that was revealed there surpassed that of the higher realms. This, however, cannot be said because there was also tremendous light above. So he says, what's the Ikar Shekhinah? The main thing he wants to say is that God's presence was felt in this world more than any other realm. Yes, there's God's felt in other realms, but before the sin of the tree of knowledge, the presence of God was felt here more than any. That's what he wants to say. And therefore, our job is definitely to make that happen again. Now, he calls this place a garden. Now, I mentioned in my text that God, the Rebbe's vision of leadership was what? My garden, I've come to my garden, my sister, my bride. What he says basically is he's saying that if this is the place where God's presence was initially felt, this is the important point, he's saying this. Therefore, it appears to be a jungle. You could look at the world as a jungle, but what? It's really a garden. If God was residing over here, if this is the place where God's presence was felt, this is my garden, God is calling this his garden, then this must be not a jungle, it's really a garden. And what's incredible is that this is the way the previous Rebbe looked at it, and the Rebbe, and this is the Weltanschauung and the whole outlook that the Rebbe had, that the world has to be defined as a holy good place, not as a not as a jungle, as a garden, as a beautiful place, as a relaxing place. Hold on a second, but there's pandemics, and this was shortly after the Holocaust. There's terrible things happening. How could you describe the world? It depends what you see, how you see the world. Okay, so let's look over here. Now, so look over here. This is what he says. V'hinei. So this above statement that we say that the essence of God's presence, the Shekhinah, was felt, manifest in this low world, in this world. It explains in the book of Medrash, Medrash is a 2,000-year-old book from the time of the Talmud, that it's talking about this lowly realm, that in this realm, the realm was where the God was felt. And he says, it explains that through the Midrash proceeds to explain that because the sin of the tree of knowledge of Shekhinah withdrew, ascending from earth to heaven, And the giving of Torah, he came back. In other words, what he's telling us that he came back. So what is it saying? That the main removal of God's presence is b'chet eitz hadas dafka, specifically through the sin of the tree of knowledge. Okay, so why is this important? It's important for us to understand. This is such an important point, because the only way we can understand what our job is if we know where we're coming from, if we know what to stop, we know what the history is. So if you know that the Midrash tells us that God's presence was originally here, and something caused God's presence to leave this world, that tells you now, okay, now I know how to achieve what I'm trying to achieve. I need to bring God's presence back into this world. That's going to be the difference was that when the first time, if we were going to mess up, God's presence would leave. But this time, he's here to stay. We make Mashiach come, God becomes revealed again, he's going to stay. It's going to be for good. Okay. So I already explained this next point. Now we're going to skip to this next idea. He says over here, we always have this concept that all seventh are cherished because they're the ones that cause the final end to the program, whatever the program is, it happens through seven. Yeah, just like by Moses, that he was the one that made the program to finally end with the seventh. So he says, the reason why this happened is not because anybody gave them this opportunity, but because they decided to make it happen. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a moment, and I want to tell you something else. We're going to go into certain things outside in the Maimon. He goes on to say as follows, that one of the unique things about it, he says, people were pushing him to become the Rebbe, right? And he's refusing. So he knows that people think that, oh, you know what, if we have a Rebbe, then we'll be able to come for break. We'll be able to come and have people somebody to inspire us. We'll have somebody that will be able to make things happen. It'll be exciting, something we get blessings from, something that we can ask advice from, and it will be his job to take care of everything else. The Rebbe was unique in the way that he was very clear. He says, listen, don't get any such ideas. I'm not here to be your coach. I'm not here to be your friend that wants you to, that's going to advise you and help you. He says, no, I'll help you, but you have a job. Don't think that by appointing me Rebbe, you're not going to have a job. The job is exactly as I pointed out. And he's unique in a way that he starts off his whole existence as a Rebbe, his whole personality as a Rebbe. His discourse, it's not just a discourse of Hasidic spiritual ideas, it's actually a raison d'etre of what his whole outlook is, what is he coming to achieve. And he points out several important elements. Number one, he says our point number one is that we're the seventh generation, therefore, it's our task to complete exactly what was meant to complete the entire mission of all of creation. Boom. Like, could you imagine somebody becomes a leader? You know, you think Trump was a little bit ambitious because he says, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make that promise. You think, I don't know, Biden's ambitious because he says he's going to get 100 million doses out. You think that, I don't know, when people make promises, they're ambitious. Could you imagine somebody starts off their leadership and says, my job, my role is nothing less than completing the entire purpose of all of creation. I'm not trying to, stop climate warming. I'm not going to try and go. I'm going to go to the Paris Accord, this thing and that deal. I'm trying to end all the problems with one major header. The biggest challenge that we've been working, that's what I want to do. That's what he said. He said, this is our job. Could you imagine somebody standing up? People were in shock. It was shock to the system. And I don't think that people really truly understood what the Rebbe was saying till the Rebbe drilled it in time and time again. It was like, wow, okay, nice idea. Like, wow, this guy has big hopes. But he didn't let up. He pushed it and pushed it. He said, okay, we're going to go out to every single community around the world. We're going to make sure that every community knows about God. And every time you're going to find a Jew, you're going to remind them. It's not your job just to inspire them, but it's their job to go and inspire the next Jew. It's their job to also, he says that in the Maimon. So he makes it very clear, you know, the famous story, the famous line of Kennedy, John F. Kennedy, I think it was, is ask not what your country could do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. That's basically what the Rebbe was saying. He said, don't think I'm going to come and I'm going to do anything for you. Yeah, he said he did say he would help. I will be here to help. But the only way we're going to achieve this is if you actually sit down. Now, when you look at the whole Rebbe's teachings, all his teachings and this history of his, on the 28th of Nisan, 5751, some 41 years later, before the end of the, just less than a year before the end of the Rebbe's, the Rebbe stopped, had a stroke and wasn't able to talk. He gives a fiery talk and he says, I have done all I can to help to achieve what I originally had set out. Now it is up to you. And that was the greatest shock. It's like a whole day within the Chabad movement. What did the Rebbe want? The Rebbe said, I'm giving it over to you. The truth is, he gave it over to us in that first thing. He says, don't get any fegelach and bosom. Fegelach means don't get any any feelings in your belly that you're going to say, you're going to relax and get all excited that I'm going to do your jobs for you. Don't get your hopes up that it's going to be easy. You want to have a Rebbe, you want to make me a Rebbe, I'm going to make you work hard. And he said that from day one. I'm going to be your Rebbe, you're going to work hard. I'm going to send you out on missions. I'm not going to just be a Rebbe. Like a lot of groups, Hasidic groups, people think that a Rebbe is, they're there to inspire you, they're able to make you feel connected. When you're feeling a little bit weak, you'll connect to them. The Rebbe said day one, yeah, I'll help you when I can, but that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you that you have to work. I'm here to tell you that I'm just going to guide you and you're going to do the work. I'm going to send you out on crazy missions. Something that was never done by any other Jewish leader in history. No one was as... it's like when I think about it and you look back at the history of what the Rebbe said in that discourse, he literally spelled out everything he was going to do. The rest of his teachings are go through the entire Torah and in showing in every single element of Torah his original raison d'etre, how it's there to bring the Mashiach, how it's there to show us that we have to work on ourselves, not rely on other people, not to stay just inspired, but to make sure that we inspire others, to make sure that we're growing. This is exactly what you'll see from the Rebbe. That's the only reason why the Rebbe was the only person that sent out shluchim to every single corner around the world, thousands of shluchim. Because he said, hold on a second, I'm not a Rebbe. You're not going to sit here in New York, listen to me talk, getting inspired, becoming a big Torah scholar. No. You're going to go out and you're going to become a leader. You're going to become a Rebbe of another group. And you're going to make all those people into Rebbes and make them leaders. The Rebbe was not interested in being a leader. He never changed that. He said for the entire year, I'm not becoming a Rebbe. And then when he said, he just stopped. He never stopped saying that. He didn't say I'll become a Rebbe. He said, okay, you want a Rebbe? I'm going to make you Rebbes. I'm going to send you out. I'm going to make you work. So that was the first point. Number two. And why did he say that? He said that because we're the seventh, we have to make this happen. We have no choice about it. It's not because we wanted to make it happen. We have to make it happen. And the only way we can do it is if we get everyone involved. Now you understand why Chabad is so crazy. The crazy Rebbe gets us crazy people. When I say crazy, I don't mean crazy as in Meshuggah, not 100%. I mean crazy as in very ambitious. Beyond, not thinking within the normal realms. He tells us the way we're going to achieve this. He talks about something called Shtus to Kedusha, and a lot of these things are based on what the previous Rebbe had said in that discourse. He says there's this concept called Shtus. Shtus means folly. Now, what folly means is, he says there's two types of shtus. He says there's shtus de klipa and shtus de klipa, de kedusha. Shtus de kedusha de klipa means that he says that it talks about in the discourse. He says there's this concept called the woman that has, so to speak, a soita. It's a woman that has, so to speak, possibly cheated on her husband. And it says that the Talmud says, why is she called a soita? Because she's turned away from the path of modesty. And tells us, the Talmud, a person only sins when they stop thinking in normal terms, when they stray from the normal way of thinking. So he says, but then the Talmud tells us there's another type of shtus, there's another type of turning away. What's that turning away? That's the shtus of kedusha, of holiness. And he says that sometimes you have to be crazy for holy reasons. Crazy for holy reasons. Crazy for holiness. How could you be crazy for holiness? How do you do that? So what he says is, the way you do that is by not taking always things on the most literal and organized level, but go beyond, push yourself way beyond. He gives an example of how the rabbis used to juggle for Simchas Beis Sheva, and that's what the Talmud brings. They called it shtus. So he says you got to go to extreme opposites of doing things beyond. Think greater, think bigger. Don't think in a small way. Think greater, think out of the box. That's what it means to be crazy. Don't think just about your circle, think about the entire world. Don't just think about yourself, think about your entire family, etc. Point number three, he talks about. He says that there's three, he makes a statement before, and he says people like in America to make statements. So I'm going to say, so they think a statement will be shocking. And he says this to people that just gone. I'm not going to say anything shocking. Everything is the same. There's three loves. The love of God, the love of the Torah, the love of the Jewish people. They're all one and the same thing. That is my raison d'etre. To teach people nothing has changed. We've got to love God, you've got to love the Torah, and you've got to love the Jewish people. Now he goes on to, in every one of his teachings, in this discourse, he brings all 7 Rebbes to explain the words of each of them and how they explain that idea. And how they each had a unique novelty in each idea. And that's funny if we look at the way we don't have the time to look in the actual discourse. But then he says there's another concept. The ultimate way of how you'll bring Mashiach is through Avat Yisrael, through love of a fellow Jew. And he brings 7 stories, a story of each one of his predecessors, 6 stories, a story of each one of his predecessors, but how they did something of extreme love for a fellow which was beyond. I'll tell you some of them. The one most, he started the Alter Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement. The story was that there was one year, it was Yom Kippur, he revealed this later on, it was Yom Kippur. The community was waiting for the Alter Rebbe, and just before, as Yom Kippur had come in the middle of Yom Kippur, the Alter Rebbe took of his tallis and he walked to the edge of town, and over there, he found a lady that had just given birth and was in need of a fire to be lit and food to be cooked for her. And there was no one there to do it. And the Alter Rebbe went himself in the middle of Yom Kippur and lit the fire and did it. And through his 6th sense, his spiritual sense, he was able to recognize that this woman did it. And he didn't ask somebody else to go do it. He went and did it himself. Now, this story was repeated numerous times by the Rebbe on other occasions. But here's one example of where you could see the power and this concept of Ahavas Yisrael. Now, if you were to look and ask me, what were the 2 main features of the Rebbe throughout his entire leadership? More than anything else, you will see these 2 concepts. The concept of Mashiach, as in we have to finish the task, we have to make it happen, and the concept of Avat Yisrael, of love of your fellow. He didn't speak about 2 things more than those 2 things. And he starts off his leadership with it. He concludes his leadership with it. One of his 10 mitzvah campaigns was the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael. He makes it his raison d'etre to teach the world to love your fellow Jew. This is the way we're going to change the world. He eventually makes this apply to all people as well, that we have to teach the entire world. I'll tell you a few more of the important stories. He brings a story of the second Chabad Rebbe, the Middler Rebbe. The Middler Rebbe, he tells a story of how somebody had come to him for a private audience. And in the private audience, the person told him about some terrible thing that he had done. And the Middler Rebbe rolled up his sleeve and he was in shock and pain. And he said, you see all these marks and wrinkles on my skin. He says, that's caused by you. I'm feeling you when you are going through what you're going through, your struggles and pain. And he says that was the Middler Rebbe, that was the Rebbe. He was literally felt what other people were going through. So his major concept was we have to do every single thing, no matter what, to show love to a fellow Jew. Because we and the other Jew are not separate. If we want to achieve the ultimate task, the only way we can do that is through love. There's no other option. The Rebbe taught fundamental concepts over here. Number one, the seventh generation, our ultimate goal is to return God's presence to be felt in this world. God should feel in this world more than anything else. Number two, we've got to do it by thinking beyond and in a crazy way in holiness. Number three, was that we have to transform. I didn't talk about this point, but we have to transform the folly of this world into holiness and look at this world as not being a place which is bad, but looking at this place as a garden, that godliness resides here. We have to just reveal it. All we're trying to do is show that God created this world to reside in it. And that's the ultimate purpose, and the way we achieve that also is through the love of our fellow Jew. Now, there's many more concepts that we've spoken about over here, but those are the main concepts that I wanted to point out tonight in the shiur.
Can I ask you a couple of questions, or maybe one question?
So,
Rebbe Greenbaum spoke about the same topic as well. My trouble is, if you meet a fellow Jew and you notice that they do something immoral, they do the wrong thing, they're abrasive, they embarrass other Jews, I have to love that person despite that I really don't like them. Now, he's a Jew. Any Jew is a Jew. You have to polish the Jew, and thereafter everything is fine. What if I'm not able to see the good in another Jew, because it's obviously he's doing the wrong, or she is doing the wrong thing? How do you handle that in practice?
The answer to your question, I don't know, but I can say this. I'm not exactly understanding why, because somebody does something wrong, you don't like them, unless it's something wrong to you personally. In other words, if they're personally wronging you, or they've really wronged somebody else in a really bad way, that's one thing. And sometimes the best type of love is to give them, to discipline them. In other words, put them in their place. But it has to be always done with love. We spoke about this, I think, in previous weeks as well. Mm-hmm. How the Rebbe always felt that there was never a way to lose hope in people, and that even people that had done something terribly wrong, we have to find it within ourselves to forgive them, but more importantly, still love them, and to set aside our own feelings, and instead of, because, you know, as parents of children, very often children will do things that are let's just say beyond satisfactory, sometimes below what we would expect, you know, below our expectations, to put it mildly, and sometimes it could be much more than that. And most parents will still love their children, even if they do something wrong. And sometimes even if they do something grievously wrong. And why is that? Why is that, parents? Because they realize that at the end of the day, the child is a part of them. And while the child may be struggling, and you see that often a parent, when they see their child suffer and struggle, they not only do they not lose their love, they may get upset at their child, but usually a healthy parent is able to set aside his feelings of the moment and how upset he is, and still say, hold on, I'm still able to love. I have to remember that. Because the only way you're going to have any hope with that child of actually helping them out, that parent to be loved, if they're full of love. But they have to not allow their love to cloud them. They have to still put that, so it's a balance between saying, hold on a second, I love this child. I can't just show my child, if it's a young child and you're still in a position to discipline them. You can't just shower your child with love, because that doesn't help them. You need to shower them with love, and you have to also discipline them. But you have to find the right balance. If you do either just one and not the other, you're going to miss out. So you have to find, so the same things with your fellow Jew. If you can love, he says, if you can love your child, even if they wrong you, then seemingly you should be able to love another fellow Jew. Now, realistically, it's not that easy, because we are human beings, and when we don't look as our fellow Jews as necessarily as the same as our children. But if we were to learn, if you learn Chassidut, and Tanya explains how we really are like fellow children, brothers and sisters. And a healthy person, even if they get upset at their brother and sister, they should still find a way to love them. And I think deep down they do. And that's important. And if you looked at, and what he wants to teach us is, it's not just, okay, blindly love your fellow Jew. It's not that. It's a whole teaching. It's a whole method. You change the way you look at your fellow. You look at your fellow not as another person. The Alter Rebbe says in chapter 32 of Tanya, you look at them as your brother or as your child. How do you do that? How do you look at that? That's a shiur for another time. But if you did that, that's how you come to love a fellow. If you started off from that place, you'd be okay before you even reach the other questions. I don't know if I've helped, but that's the way I see answering the question.
Yes, it did help. But maybe you can have a shiur how to do that in difficult situations. I mean, the black and white situations, people can work it out. But it is the gray areas I'm struggling with.
Okay, so we have to learn, there's two things that we really would have to learn that discuss on this topic. And that is chapter 32 of Tanya. Well, there's a few things. The Rebbe once handed out a kuntras called Kuntras Avos Yisrael. A kuntras is like a what do you call it? It's not a pamphlet, but it's a sorry?
Collection. Not really.
Not collection, but it's like a book. It's like a magazine, but just without pictures. You know, it's just teaching. So what's the right word? A booklet. Thank you. It's a booklet. A booklet of a long discourse discussion on the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael. So Kuntras Avos Yisrael. So it's a long discourse discussing how to have Avos Yisrael. And thirdly, there is another discourse, a book from the third Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe's namesake, the Tzemach Tzedek. He's got a book called Derech Mitzvah Yisecha. And one of the first mitzvahs that he writes about, if not the first, is the mitzvah of Avos Yisrael, loving your fellow. And apparently he may have written that when he was 13 years old. But it's extremely powerful. So we will what maybe next week or maybe another week we will learn these concepts, and I think that would answer a lot of those questions. Probably best if we started with chapter 32 of Tanya. Probably the best. Okay, because that answers a lot of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other questions from tonight's shiur? We will talk about we have learned a few shiur topics that we've got out. We've got to talk about, what was it? Talking to the dead and all that type of that topic, connecting with people that have passed away, praying at the burial place of the righteous, and the concept of what it means to truly love your fellow. So we've left some work for ourselves. Please God, in the future, we will have detailed shiurim on these topics.
Rabbi, in the next fortnight, maybe 3 weeks, I might be able to come, but not for sure. I have to go to Sydney.
Okay, no problem.
So I'm not sure if it all fits in.
Sure,
So
no problem.
if I'm not there, don't take it personal.
No problem. No problem. Okay.
Fritz, you could send me your questions and I'll raise them if you want.
Yeah, but I want to know the answers. The questions are easy. The answers are more challenging.
Okay.
If I'm not there, don't take it personal.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. And well, we'll see you whenever you can come on. Thank you.
Hopefully soon. Bye-bye.
And yeah, if you have any questions, you could always send them to Joe, and he may have the answers for you before they even get to me. But no, you're welcome to ask. I love your questions. Bye. Have a good night. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Bye all.
See you again on Thursday. Bye. Bye, everybody. Have a good night.